Hello and welcome again to another session on our course in social psychology. This is session 2, and if you recall in session 1, we established the fact that social psychology is a science. And it is a science because it adopts scientific methods in the study of human behavior and mental processes. In this session, we are going to look at some of these methods. In all, we are going to look at 6 methods, 4 of which are going to be discussed in this session. How do social psychologists go about conducting their research? So that at the end of this session, you should be able to identify these methods. Like I said, in this session, we are going to look at the observation method, the ethnographic method, the archival method, and the survey method. You should be able to know how these are applied in conducting research, and you should be able to know the strengths and the shortcomings of each of these methods, to know which one to use in the event that you need to conduct your own research. So the topics to be covered in this session, basically to start off, is to understand why do we need to conduct research, and to identify each of these methods which I've mentioned already. My expectation is that you would read chapter 1 of the recommended text and the journal article on methods, which will be posted on Sakai. Why study research methods? This is not a research methods class, this is a social psychology class. But you still need the research methods to study those social behavior and phenomena that you are interested in as a social psychologist. So it is relevant that we study these methods to be able to avoid the mistakes that others make when it comes to studying behavior. It helps you to conduct what we call thought experiments. There are certain experiments you wish you could conduct, but which are unethical to do or impractical to do. For instance, my son asked me, if I change my sister's diaper and I put it in a pot and I poured water on it, what would it turn to? Right? And you're asking, is it ethical to put a soiled diaper in a saucepan? It's impractical to do. If I just put this human being under this vehicle and ran over him, what would happen? It's unethical to do. So these are experiments you conduct in your mind and go on an expedition or an excursion of imagination. We say that in this text, in this course, you are going to be reading a textbook. There is a recommended text, which is filled with a lot of experiments. How are you going to understand the experiments? How are you going to even be able to critique the experiments? That will be possible when you know the methods. Then you will know if the methods have been properly applied or not. So knowing the methods in research helps you or makes you a better consumer of knowledge. Recently, there was some reports about the performance of members in parliament, those who were graded grade A, grade B, and whatever. To be able to know if those findings are authentic, you should be able to ask what methods were used and how were these methods applied. Then you would believe the findings that come out of such research. And finally, the essence of knowing these methods is so that you can be able to choose your own research topic and know which of the methods will be appropriate to use to study that behavior scientifically. So to start off, what is the systematic observation method? We say that it is a method that seeks to study behavior in a careful, accurate, and measured manner. So you are not just walking through some place and just not taking note of your environment. You are saying that be conscious of your environment. Take note of every minute detail. And not only take note of it, record it. So for instance, you visit a family in a rural area and you're observing them eat together. They have a big bowl of fufu, father, mother, children, grandchildren, all sitting by. As a researcher, you don't only take a picture of it, but after taking the picture, observe the interactions as they sit to eat. Who takes the first piece of meat? Who gets the last piece of meat? Who gets the bigger piece of meat? Who does this? Who does that? Who cleans up after? Who serves the meal? That would explain the hierarchy of authority in that family. It will explain the gender relations when you take note of all the minute details. Again, you can go to the mall and decide, I'm going to observe how people interact and relate with each other. So as you stand by as a researcher, you are watching who says hello to who. How is the hello said? Is it a handshake? Is it a hi? Is it a hug? Is it a scream? Or even this can be done at the airport. How do people welcome or see people off at the airport? So observation is not just a mere looking through, but taking notes of every little happening and trying to draw links between what it is that you have observed. That is why we say it is systematic. It is not a haphazard exercise, but it is a precise, measured exercise. Observation can happen in many ways. Sometimes you have to be a participant observer, where you are yourself involved in the process and acting along and taking notes of what happens. You could also not be a participant, but sit aside, an example I gave, and watch people eat, for instance, and interview them, engage them. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And take notes of what it is that you observe in a systematic manner. The observation method, though it is good, has its own limitations. There are certain things you cannot study using this method because these things rarely happen or they happen in private. For instance, if you want to see how Ghanaians will react to a hurricane, you probably would have to wait a lifetime. There might not ever be a hurricane in this part of the world, right? But if perhaps you want to see how Ghanaians will behave in the event of a flood, yes, that may happen. There will be flooding and you see what will happen. So there are certain things you may want to study, but which would rarely occur. And so this method will not be the best to use. Again, there are certain things that happen in private, right? We talk of the sociologist as a voyeur. For instance, if you want to study how people engage in sex, sex is a very private matter. You don't go as a sociologist with a camera to go and observe people having sex, to see how people have sexual pleasure. It is very private. And so this method cannot be used to observe behavior in such context. Then if you know the method, you know that, yes, I want to study sexual pleasure, but I need to use a different method to achieve my goals. The other method we want to consider is ethnography. Here again, we use some observation, but ethnography is relatively long term. It's a method where the researcher wants to understand a people, wants to understand a culture from the people's own point of view and not the researcher's point of view. So for instance, you may decide to go and live among the Krobos as a researcher for 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, to observe how they perform their depot rites from the people's point of view. So you're asking them questions. Why do you do this at this point? Why do the girls have to do this or not have to do that? And it is their account, it's their description of the situation that you report and not your own perception of the situation. So we say ethnography wants to understand people from their own point of view and not your point of view as a researcher. But ethnography also has its challenges. We're saying that the researcher is going to record what the people have told him. But of course, the researcher is also observing to see if what they have said is also what he is also witnessing. So we are, as consumers of knowledge, we are relying on an ethnographic report, the ethnographer's account of the situation. And human as we are, sometimes ethnographers may also be biased in their recording of events. And so if the ethnographer gets it wrong, then we all get it wrong, right? So the way to deal with that challenge is to use what is known as interjudge reliability. One ethnographer goes to study the Krobo depot rites, and you are not sure if what is recording or reporting is accurate. look for another researcher's account and another researcher's account. So between different judges, inter-judge, you are assessing the reliability of the information that has been provided. Then we also have archival research. And here, this we say is a secondary kind of research where you are not going into the field yourself to conduct the data, but you are doing your research based on others' recordings, others' reports. Here again, you are going through archives, secondary accumulated documents to observe what people's behavior is, what people's attitudes are, what people's values and cultural expectations are. There are several sources of archival documents. There are diaries, novels, music, advertisement, newspaper, police reports, census data, movies, music. These are sources of archival data. For instance, if you came into Ghana as a visitor and you just wanted to know the belief system of the Ghanaian, all you need to perhaps do is to listen to our music and watch our movies. Within a short time, you would come to the conclusion that Ghanaians or Africans are a very religious people, believing in the supernatural, what we call as sociologists as the SNAL. S standing for the supernatural being, there's a belief in God. N standing for nature gods, we believe in rivers, waters, and all of those. We believe in the ancestors, and that is what influences the kind of funerals that we have. We believe in lesser spirits, sorcery. So in these parts, nobody dies a natural death. Once the person dies, we want to consult and want to explain it by some other happening besides science, right? So our literature, our music, our art forms, our novels depict what our beliefs are as a people. If you want to know gender relationships, you can find these from archival documents or any other matter that is of interest to you as a student of social psychology. These archival documents sometimes may also not be accurate. Here again, we are at the mercy of the original compilers. So if they get it wrong, we get it wrong. And so the way to go about this, again, is to use inter-judge reliability. For instance, Africans until recently have not really been at the forefront of telling their own story. So you have other people reporting on African culture, and sometimes they don't report it positively. And so the world does not really know or have a good vision of Africa. But when we as Africans start reporting or recounting our own history and culture, we are more likely to provide a better and accurate account of our situation. Then we have surveys. Another way to study social behavior is surveys. And surveys are often used when you want to study people's beliefs and want to study perceptions, right? Surveys would involve having what we call a questionnaire, where you have written questions about the subject you want to study, go to the people, ask their views about that subject, what their beliefs are, what their attitudes are, and cumulatively collect their responses and put that out as a reflection of what people think, how people feel, and how people would behave in certain circumstances. For instance, you want to know people's perceptions or beliefs about corruption. You can go with a questionnaire and ask relevant questions to know whether people believe that corruption is pervasive or not. If you want to study a sensitive matter, such as, say, abortion, given the religious environment, people may not be open about talking about abortion. The best way to study such a situation is to use a survey and not an observation method. So with a survey, participants feel anonymous and they are more likely to give you accurate responses. So from these little that I've said, imagine, put yourself in the place of a researcher. You want to understand what people think about corruption. which of the methods would you use? Observation method? Perhaps you go with a hidden camera to go and observe when corruption happens. How practical is it to do that? It depends on your objectives. Are you going to use ethnographic method? Are you going to use archival documents? Yes, perhaps you could. There are several accounts of corruption in the newspaper in other areas. Or you use the sample method. So in this session, we are saying that social phenomenon is diverse. Social behavior is diverse. And there is no one single method that is best equipped to study the diverse behaviors that we have. So there are several methods, and depending on what you want to achieve, one method may be more suitable to use than the other. Simply what I'm saying that no method is superior to the other. Which is better to use is dependent on what you are seeking to investigate. So basically, we are saying that you can use observation method, the ethnographic method, the archival documentation method, or you can use the survey method. This is the first part of our session, our discussion on methods. In our next session, we'll look at 2 other methods that social psychologists use. Thank you.